Now, the Canadian Pacific Railway was truly a challenge for them to build. Some people thought it was impossible. Some people thought it couldn't be done. But they had the money, the will. They had the plans, they had the resources, and they prosecuted this plan. Now, the reasons why this happened are extremely big and could have changed our future. What could have been USA and what could have been Canada? But let's talk about some of those reasons why the Canadian Pacific Railway was built first. First of all, there was this man, MacDonald, John A. MacDonald. And building the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, was part of his MacDonald's national policy. He dreamed of making the country come together from sea to sea, he says. A railway would fulfill the Canadian government's promise to British Columbia when it entered Confederation. It would also bring thousands of settlers to the Northwest Territories that were scarcely populated. There wasn't many people living there. And that is a big benefit, specifically for the farmers and everyone that needed to start a business. As you see, there's not too much room in the other areas, and they wanted people to move over here so they could get more farmland, and it's easy business. The Canadian Pacific Railway would also provide them easy transportation for their crops and everything for business. Now, after MacDonald was elected in 1878, he worked directly into the Canadian Pacific Railway, and he had the construction started in 1880 on the Canadian Pacific Railway. A company was formed, the Canadian Pacific Railway Company. Now, the company was given the task of building a large railway from Montreal to the west coast of British Columbia. To look into some more reasons, the railway was a real political necessity for Canada, and an economic necessity for Canada. But on the politics side again, an all-Canadian railway would meet the demand for an efficient transportation and communication system across Canada. As you see, this was near the day of the telephone, but not even close. The internet was not even a thing. And most transportation in those days was mostly like a sled, a boat, or an animal like a horse to ride on. As you see, most of those transportations were not fast enough, or they were only able to be used during a certain time of the year. And they were only able to go through so many areas. As you see, the train, once they build it, they could build it through any way they want to whichever way would be the best for them. It'd be the fastest and it'd be an all year round way use. As you see, a horse, you wouldn't be going through the winter in those bad conditions. You would die, and it would take way too long to get from one place to the other. And a sled, you mostly go downhill during that one and can only be used in winter, which are two big downsides. Extreme downsides. This train was a huge benefit. A huge benefit to Canada. As you see, it would help unify Canada as one, making sure that we could stay connected and make sure that we have efficient transportation for everyone to stay in contact and make sure that the necessities are needed, for example, battle, are received to the other forces in time. Now, as you see, the Northwest Territories were sparsely populated. The Canadian Pacific Railway would open up this area for settlement by Canadian and European settlers rather than Americans. This would also be some good farmland for people to start farming on. As you see, the train system, the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, would help them transport their crops when they're still able to stay at their farms. This would help them a lot through business because they could continue going on year-round and still produce crops. They don't have to worry about going on a camel in small amounts. They could load tons and tons of their crops and get tons of business all the way through. Hook up with markets, you could get your product there still fresh and ready. Again, the train wasn't the fastest, but it was a huge improvement for the time. But a more important reason would be the good lands of the American Midwest were rapidly being settled. The Red River area had close ties with the United States, and this was a concern that Americans would move northwards and make the Northwest Territories part of the United States. Large numbers of American gold seekers had moved from California goldfields to the colony of British Columbia. There was a concern that it would be annexed by the Pacific Northwest, California and Oregon region. The United States acquired Alaska in 1867, and American expansion was feared because of the U.S. policy of manifest destiny. Canadian politicians also feared American railways might extend to their operations into Canada. They did not want this to happen, as it weaken their land, and some of that might become the United States. For some events that happened, the trade between Canada and the United States declined with the end of the Respiratory Treaty in 1866. The new provinces in Canada needed other markets. Canadian businessmen reasoned that if other areas of British North America were settled, the settlers could become a market for goods made in central Canada and in the Atlantic provinces. They needed to be connected by a railroad to distribute goods efficiently. As already said about the farmer, this could be used for such stuff as military equipment and just mail and keeping in contact with loved ones. The land was also very valuable. The railway was needed so Canada could compete with the United States for trade with the Red River area and the colony of British Columbia. Both the Red River area and British Columbia had economic ties with the United States. After the decline of gold rush in British Columbia, new markets were needed to solve the colony's economic problems. The colony of British Columbia could not survive as an isolated outpost. A railway to both of these areas would be an economic benefit. But now onto the construction, the challenge, the costs of the project. Now, the CPR was extremely expensive to construct. Even though the builder was a private company, not government-owned, it needed the financial help of the government. As McDonald promised, the CPR, the following. $25 million for the construction, 10 million hectares of western land, 1,100 kilometers of railway lines had already been built, tour-free railway building materials, and a 20-year monopoly over all the traffic in southern prairies. After a good time on construction, the $25 million that the government gave the CPR was not enough. The company went back to the government twice to get more money to continue building the railway. In 1885, officials from the CPR approached the government again to ask for more money. Many people said that transcontinental railway was a crazy dream which the country could not afford. They opposed the request for more money. However, the Northwest resistance took place in the West that year. The president of the CPR, William Van Horn, transported soldiers to the West on the railway. It was still unfinished in some places. The Canadian public was impressed by the speed which the soldiers reached the area of conflict by the railway. As a result, the CPR received more money from the government for further construction. Now, William Van Horn, an American, was hired as general manager of the CPR in 1881. He began in the prairies. Progress there would be quick because of the flat land. At Winnipeg, 5,000 men and 1,700 teams of horses worked in order to fulfill Van Horn's promise of 800 kilometers of track laid in 1 year. The navvies worked all day at first. Later, they even worked at night. The rail moved across the prairies at a rate of 5 or 6 kilometers a day. Now, on the Canadian Shields, it was really hard to build on. Once construction on the prairies was moving rapidly, Van Horn turned his attention to the Canadian Shield, Ontario. This was a much more difficult task. The route through the Canadian Shield was once described as 200 miles of engineering impossibility. The builders had to cope with rock and muskeg. The hard granite rock had to be blasted with dynamite, a new invention, in order to make a smooth path. The muskeg had to be filled with tons of gravel to make a solid base. Otherwise, it would simply swallow up the track without a trace. Now, in the end, it took 7 years to complete the 700 kilometers from Lake Superior to Winnipeg. It would have been much easier and faster, therefore less expensive, to take a southerly route on American land. However, Prime Minister MacDonald insisted that the railway be built on entirely Canadian soil. As said, the benefits of USA not bleeding into Canada and taking our land. As I'm not allowed to surpass 15-minute video uploads, there will be a second part uploaded. It should be up now, and if not, by tomorrow. But for now, this is the end of the first part. Put on the second part right now. I'm waiting to put it on. You gonna put it on? No. Well, you know what? Screw you then. I'm ending this video right now so you go to the next one.